Have you ever heard the saying, if you don't have anything nice to say nothing? Well, that pretty much summed up my relationship with Morgan. I love my wife to pieces, but her mother was a devil. I never saw her have fun once in the 26 years that I knew her. When Morgan passed last year, I can't say that I was happy, but I also can't say that I was sad either. That lack of sadness was noticeable and caused friction between me and the missus. It took a few weeks, but we were eventually able to come to a common understanding on the matter. Fast forward a couple more weeks. Me and the wife were getting down to the last few boxes of Morgan's belongings. Some things were sold, some were given to charity, and of course, some were kept by my wife as mementos. My wife came across a handbag in one of the boxes, one she didn't remember her mother owning. She grabbed it and held it up in front of herself in the mirror. I wanted to tell her how ugly I thought it looked, but we had just made up from the last fight. I kept it to myself. Thankfully, my wife thought the color clashed with her skin tone. She was about to toss it back in the box when I told her to check the inside. Her mother was known for stashing jewelry in her purses, sometimes even other people's. My wife checked the bag. Nothing but pieces of candy and a cell phone. My wife asked if I thought the phone was still worth anything. We needed to find out if it still worked first. We plugged the phone in and went about sorting the rest of the boxes. Back at home that evening, I grabbed the phone to inspect it. The text messages were few, so were the contacts. I still couldn't tell who it belonged to. I opened the photos folder for more clues and started scrolling. Immediately, I saw a picture of a dog I recognized, but from where? I handed my wife the phone. The dog belonged to one of her mother's neighbors. My guess was the phone did too. I planned to return it to Mrs. Wells the next day. I imagined she wanted it back, and likely her handbag also. My wife kept scrolling, and as she did, she began coming across several bizarre photos. She handed me the phone back and asked me what appeared to be in the corner of one particular image. I zoomed in as close as possible, but still couldn't make it out. My wife saw something floating near the window in the photograph. I proposed that it was a lighting issue, but my wife kept scrolling. She pointed it out again in another picture. I got a better look. I could see something. I told her it looked like a shadow. A shadow from what, she asked, and why is it floating? Cameras weren't my expertise, but I knew they could have all sorts of issues. I gave my wife my thoughts, but she wasn't buying. She pointed out that whatever it was only in the pictures from Mrs. Wells' kitchen. At that point in the conversation, I silently decided that I didn't care. I let my wife finish her sleuth work and then told her to slide the phone into my jacket pocket. I wanted to remember to drop it off the next day. Mrs. Wells' son was carrying groceries into her house when I drove him to her street. I got out of my car and gave him a hand. I showed him the handbag. I said I figured it could have been his mother's. The phone too. He took the phone and started thumbing through. He had never seen it before. He said his mother didn't even know how to text, let alone snap pictures with one. He agreed it was her house and herself in the photos. He just didn't know who took them. I then pointed out the shadows to him in some of the images. His look of confusion faded and the big grin widened across his face. Wow, it still does that. I asked him what it was. He said I wouldn't believe him if he told me. I wanted to hear anyway. When his mother first bought the house, she received a gift from her aunt. It was a glass bird sculpture the aunt had acquired during one of her trips abroad. It purportedly had mystical powers attached to it. The giftee was meant to place the bird somewhere around their stove, and allegedly the ornament would supernaturally assist with culinary preparation. Never burn your food, never forget a recipe, your food will never make anyone ill, so on and so forth. Mrs. Wells had set her gift in the windowsill right above her oven. In no time, one of her children accidentally knocked it from the ledge. The glass broke apart into tiny pieces, and no matter how long she searched, Mrs. Wells was never able to find a replacement. Her son enlarged one of the photos on the shadow. He pinpointed 3 distinct sections. We think these are the wings, and this is the tail. He was right. I didn't believe him. He said his family presumed the shadow to be the bird's spirit. Since the bird broke, he continued, Sometimes the silhouette just appears in photos by that window. Weird, ain't it? Was this a story he had polished over time, or was he making it up as he spoke? While I contemplated my own question, Mrs. Wells walked out of her house and onto her steps. Eagerly, her son rushed over to her and held the phone up before her face. If the story he gave me was a lie, then it was already pre-rehearsed. On cue, Mrs. Wells smiled, then bopped her son in the back of his head. She began fussing about how many things he and his siblings had broke while growing up. She included a threat to renege on repaying him for the groceries. He jokingly blamed me for causing him to be hit and for his potential financial forfeiture. I feigned a laugh to share in the moment, but I thought the way the conversation breezed right by the bird spirit references was odd. I had so many questions and objections, but again, since I didn't have anything nice to say. Mrs. Wells also said she didn't remember who took the photographs. It wasn't her phone, but it was her bag. I handed it to her. They thanked me, then let me know they had more errands to run. Her son handed the phone back to me and helped his mother back inside the car. I climbed back in my own car and watched as they pulled away from the street. I opened the photos folder in the phone once again and zoomed in. I had never noticed before, but after talking to the neighbors, the floater was starting to resemble a bird. Maybe I need my head examined too.